How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. So excited to have you here today and show you this fantastic episode. Just want to say quickly that episodes like this one and all the ones before and the ones in future are made possible by people who subscribe. Hopefully, just like you. I'm going to ask you today if you can leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a rating, leave a like or a comment, and just support the show in the little ways that you can, like that. It makes a huge difference on my end. And quickly, just want to plug as well. I've taken 30 of the best episodes of this podcast and turned them into a fantastic book that goes into 150 secrets to greatness. Each one of those 30 episodes gets crunched down into 5 of the best key takeaways from the whole talk and turns them into a fantastic book. Highly recommend you check it out. Please support the show by grabbing a copy, either a paperback or an ebook. And I can't wait to show you guys this one today. So guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 153 of Talk4, the Quickfire podcast, where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Skupien. That's me. Let me introduce an incredible guest for today, Trevor, call sign Phantom Merrell, who's going to be answering our questions today. So, Phantom, what an absolute honor. Great to have you here, and welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Thanks, Louis. Doing great. I'm excited to be here. It's I've been listening to your podcast now for a few weeks, and I've enjoyed the speakers that you have on and the interviews you've been doing. So look forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely brilliant. Been super excited about this one. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to some of those episodes. No doubt about it. Some really hard hitting individuals there and some great leaders, and you're going to be right among them. Can't wait to dig into it. So let's introduce you to the people who are here today listening in. I would love to just get the kind of short form, in a nutshell, sort of intro into the life of you, really, then. So kind of if you have, a minute or a couple of minutes to give us that elevator pitch and just what day-to-day life for you looks like, what your job is and where you're based, that would be a fantastic starting point. And then we're going to dig into these 4 great questions here. So yeah, start us off there, man.
You bet. So as you said, Trevor Phantom Merrell, I'm currently the commander of the 25th Attack Group at Shaw Air Force Base, and we fly the MQ-9 for the United States Air Force. And the 25th Attack Group is the conventional force offering of MQ-9s to the combatant commands. So we fly around the world. My group has 4 squadrons that are called attack squadrons, and then we have 1 operational support squadron. And I've got squadrons here at Shaw Air Force Base, at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. Prior to this, I worked on the Joint Staff, but I've had the privilege for the last almost 15 years of flying the MQ-9 now and being involved with that either on staff or actual operating. Prior to that, I flew F-16s in the Air Force and then commissioned through the ROTC program at Arizona State University at Brigham Young University and grew up as an Air Force brat. I've got 1 beautiful wife and 4 amazing kids, and that's me.
Fantastic. I mean, the MQ-9, what an incredible piece of kit. I can't wait to dig into everything about it and all the stuff that you do. So what we tend to do is kind of go into a bit of a backstory look in to begin these kind of episodes. And that first question is always going to be about where the initial motivations were. So Colonel Merrell, your career spans numerous roles then. As you mentioned, the F-16, the MQ-9, to now commanding the 25th Attack Group. What motivated you to pursue such a dynamic path in the Air Force, and how did those kind of early experiences shape your leadership approach in the operational and strategic roles you've held? So any early influences there, key motivations or mentors along the way? Yeah, run us through it.
Similar, I think, to a lot of your guests, I probably had the same motivators growing up. Seeing jet aircraft, for the first time. My dad was in the Air Force. He's one of my heroes. So we grew up around, Air Force bases and just saw them on a regular basis. And I think that was my first motivation and, a dream of wanting to fly there, just seeing the aircraft. I loved putting together models. So I'd make models, everything I could find and learn about, aircraft, was my passion. Also growing up in the Air Force, a lot of our family friends and whatnot were pilots as well. So talking to them and hearing about their experiences was the big piece there. Um, my mom is a school teacher, a longtime school teacher, and I think she instilled in us a passion for learning and growth, and mastery. And I think that's been a motivator throughout. Um, so it was an easy choice for me probably from a very young age. I wanted to fly. And that was the goal, the stake that I threw in the ground, out in front of me. And then everything I did oriented or pointed me towards that, whether it be, trying to do extremely well in school, participating in sports. I did scouts growing up. There's just a lot of different things that were all leaning towards that. Um, I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and I failed my physical at the time because I just recovered from pneumonia. I'd spent a week in the backwoods. We were elk hunting, and we got snowed on, got caught in a snowstorm, and I caught pneumonia. So when I went for the physical, I failed the physical. And at that point, I thought some of my dreams had been crushed and destroyed. But then did some research and found out about ROTC, where you can commission going through universities. And so signed up and got on scholarship and did that. And ultimately got selected for pilot training, went to pilot training, and then the rest, is history from there. It has been a dynamic career path that I've been on, from F-16s to MQ-9s to staff to command. Not all of it by choice, and I think we can get into some of these details, in follow-on questions. But it's been a unique path, definitely, to get where I'm at, for sure.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. So what were the I know most pilots go into pilot training and stuff, or when they have that option, coming to the graduation and get assigned to a jet or an aircraft, they obviously have a choice and they can list out the things that they are looking to go into. So, what did that look like for you? Was the Viper the dream for you? Or I'm just kind of trying to draw the parallels here. So obviously, the F-16, that's the whole fighter pilot experience. The MQ-9, it's a very different ball game, very different experience. So kind of walk me through a bit of that. Was the MQ-9 on your kind of radar, if you will, excuse the pun, from early on during that, when you were kind of making that list, or was that something that came along later down the line, for a different reason?
The MQ-9 was nowhere on the list. The F-16 was all over the list. As I went through pilot training, I loved it. I really loved it. I think I struggled at first, like a lot of us do, but ended up grasping it fairly fast after that. Graduated number one in my pilot training class and was able to pick. The squadron commander said, "Hey, Lieutenant Merrell, what do you want to go fly? The choice is yours." And so I spent some time thinking about it. I think I was motivated by the multi-role aspect of the F-16. I was motivated by the fact that it flew fast, and I was motivated by the fact I wanted something with an air-to-ground role at the time. So we were, it was heavy in the global war on terror at the time, and I wanted to participate, in the mission there. So it had to have an air-to-ground role. So it came down to the A-10 and the F-16, but I think the speed, once I was flying T-38s in pilot training, I love the speed aspect. So that's where the F-16 beat out the A-10. And then selfishly at the time, I wanted a single seat cockpit also. I think I had been sick of an instructor, flying behind me for up to a year in pilot training, and I wanted my own aircraft. I did not appreciate at the time, I think, the strength that is a crewed aircraft as well, that I learned later in the MQ-9. So because of that, I didn't want to fly the Strike Eagle as well. So it by process of elimination, it became the F-16. And I thoroughly loved it. The MQ-9 didn't come until after my first operational assignment, where I was volunteered, or voluntold, as we sometimes say in the Air Force, to go fly the MQ-9 there. And this is a long story that I'll try and summarize, but at the time, so this was 2008 when I transitioned from the F-16 to the MQ-9. The MQ-9 was in an extreme growth model at the time. So the Air Force basically had one MQ-9 they were flying, and we have tens of MQ-9s, now that we're flying anywhere around the globe at any one time. So hundreds of aircraft, but to keep those 10s up airborne at any one time. At the time, we had one, and it was about to explode. And so the Air Force took my year group, and everyone that had less than 400 hours was eligible for a program called TAMI 21. And they took a large chunk of that year group and transplanted us from the F-16, some A-10, some Strike Eagle, but they transplanted us to the MQ-1, the MQ-9, and the U-28. And again, this is hot and heavy global war on terror. Everything was oriented towards the Middle East. And those were 3 aircraft that were used heavily, right, in those conflicts. And so they took a group of us and transplanted us over, and we went very bitterly, I think, from our cockpits over to these remotely piloted aircraft or U-28. It's a long story of how I got there as well, of how I got put on that list, and it involves an ejection at Spangdahlem Air Force Base in Western Germany that I made my wing commander, I think, a little uncomfortable and a little unhappy at the time. So I went from being at the bottom of that list to move over to the top of the list by making the colonel, by making it difficult for him in his job at the time.
I see. One of those situations then. So, well, I mean, super interesting. Yeah. What was some of the well, I'd love to think to kind of what the criteria was then. So at that stage, how kind of new was the MQ-9 to the scene? What sort of credentials did you need to have to be able to, be around it and work with it and fly it essentially? Yeah, just some of those things there. How was that team picked?
It was very new. The Air Force was still figuring it out. The MQ-9 is a big cousin of the MQ-1. So a lot of the same systems that are on the MQ-1 are just on the MQ-9, but in a bigger format. There's new technology there as well, but it's very similar. So the Air Force had been flying the MQ-1 for several years, and so we were familiar with those systems. When I moved to the MQ-9, so I showed up at Creech Air Force Base in late spring of 2008. We showed up, there were 9 of us, and it was the bitterest group of captains that the Air Force had probably ever seen, again, for previously explained reasons. But we showed up, and there was a small cadre there that was going to instruct us in the MQ-9. They, however, were still figuring out a lot of the things at the same time that we were. So we sort of all trained ourselves on the MQ-9. We were given the technical order for the MQ-9. This was an aircraft, however, that was designed, created by engineers, and we argued for engineers, not necessarily for pilots themselves. The human-machine interface is cumbersome. It's difficult. It's not your traditional stick and rudder system. For example, you would think if I wanted to control the airspeed of my aircraft, I would use the throttle. And the MQ-9 does have a throttle. But instead of using the throttle to control that airspeed, I actually push forward on the stick and I set an airspeed. So a lot of things were backwards. So it took some time to get used to in there. But like I said, we were still figuring it out. By the time we got done with the training, I would say I was somewhat familiar with the aircraft, but it took experience flying it before I could say I became proficient at flying the MQ-9 there.
Yeah. So let's dig into some of the lessons learned from both cockpits then, I suppose. So over 2,900 flight hours across several aircraft types, including the F-16 and the MQ-9, obviously extensive combat and operational experience. Wondering if you could just share a little bit of the kind of info you have there around some of the pivotal moments from your time flying combat missions in Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. How did those experiences kind of shape your approach to leadership in combat? And yeah, just some of those kind of cockpit lessons learned, really, I suppose.
You bet. I'll go as I look back, I'll go in chronological order here, Louis. I think that'll be the easiest here. So pilot training. I will never forget my very first check ride in the T-37. I'm old enough to have flown the T-37. The T6 is the trainer aircraft now, but it used to be the T-37. And the student and the instructor sit side by side in the T-37. It's a subsonic jet dual engine trainer. And we had been through about probably a dozen rides before you hit your first check ride. And check rides are big things, right? It's where you find out if you're going to move on or not. And so I'm nervous as all get out. I'm just like shaking in my boots, right? And so we get up, I start the aircraft up, we start taxiing out. I do a couple radio calls. We almost get out to the runway, and there's several jets lined up waiting to take off. And as we taxi out, I'm an idiot, and I try and taxi right behind one of the aircraft without the wing clearance of it. And the instructor has to take the aircraft, and he stops it. And he looks over at me. He's like, "What were you thinking, man? What are you doing?" And I wasn't thinking. I wasn't doing it at the time. I was just, reacting kind of deal. And then I can tell he's hesitating there, and then he hands it back to me, and I fix it, and we take off. And the sortie actually ends up going really well. And I'll never forget, we get to the debrief, and after I'm done, doing my own debrief, I hand the pens over to him, and he says, "That was really weird. I wanted to call knock it off and just fail the check ride there before we even got airborne, because that was pretty dumb what you tried to do, right? We would have hit another aircraft." And he said, "But something in me just said, hey, let's let this keep going and assess, see what happens from there." And sure enough, we took off, and I was able to put that behind me and actually flew a great jet that day, and ended up doing very well on the check ride, other than the almost hitting another aircraft on the ground, right? And so I learned from that experience that you just have to put those things behind you. We're gonna make mistakes, but you got to put them behind you. And that's something that I believe, and I've tried to adopt into my leadership model, right? That we have to assume risk somewhere, but if you're gonna give your folks, right, the stick to run with, then ultimately you have to accept the possibility that there's going to be failure in there as well. Now you mitigate that as a leader at times and try and mitigate where that failure could or would happen, right? But you have to accept that as a leader. I think another formative experience in there was the ejection that I alluded to. So finished pilot training, went to F-16 training, did well there, showed up at my first base. It's at Spangdahlem Air Force Base in Western Germany, an incredible location. You're in Western Germany, rural Germany. We've got two F-16 squadrons there and an A-10 squadron at the time. And the flying is incredible. I showed up even, and they said, "Hey, Lieutenant Merrell, don't unpack your bags. We're going to a NATO exercise in Africa, Cape Verde, Africa." And so I literally didn't. I kept one suitcase, and we left, and we went to Cape Verde. And I did my mission qualification training with the squadron largely there. So we flew out over the water, integrated, with some of the maritime assets. It was awesome. Flying was incredible again. Came back to Germany, and I finished my combat training with the squadron there. So they blessed me and said, "Yep, you're good to go. We're happy to welcome you to the squadron," basically as a mission qualified pilot at that point.
Sounds good so far.
We went to, it was awesome, right? My dream was happening. And we left immediately after that. After I got them qualified, we went to Romania, and we flew with the MiG-21s. We were the first fighter squadron into Romania, at the time. We flew with the MiG-21s. We were out raging over Transylvania, over the Black Sea, integrating with the MiG-21s and fighting them as well. I mean, it was awesome. It was incredible. We come back from Romania, and again, I'm got my hair on fire. Life is good. Our family's doing well, and I have a really bad sortie where I came back, and I'll explain it here. So the runway at Spangdahlem, it's a single runway, 05 and 23, and up to that point, I had always landed on runway 23. The runway is up on a plateau, and it's a sloped runway. So those familiar with aviation, there's a lot of optical visual illusions with both of those things, a runway on a plateau and the fact that it's a sloped runway. And I had set my sight picture on land to one end of the runway, 23. And the opposite end, 05, has the exact opposite optical illusions with an upsloped runway. And then this, again, sitting up on a gradual plateau on this end as opposed to a steep cliff on the other side. So there's a Cat 3 ILS antenna that used to sit 1,000 feet short of the overrun. And on a clear in a million day, I come back in a 4-ship, I'm number 4, and I clip that antenna on my main landing gear. And it catastrophically hits the gear at a joint where the gear just comes loose and it's swaying in the wind. And ultimately, it led to a controlled bailout of the aircraft. And this is where me and my wing commander didn't become best friends, after this. It was quite an experience, though. I learned afterwards I was the 6th pilot in the previous 7 years to actually hit that very antenna. It was 11 feet taller than what FAA regulations allowed. And all those optical illusions, right, had led to several incidents prior to this. Mine was the first one that was catastrophic, though, that led to a bailout. I learned several things in that incident. In that formation, my flight lead was my squadron commander. Number 2 in the flight was our squadron weapons officer, who's the combat lead of the squadron. Number 3 was our group standardization evaluation chief. So arguably the best pilot on the base of all 3 squadrons. And then there was Lieutenant Merrell as number 4, right? The rookie in there. After I had hit the antenna, I climbed to high key over top the airfield and orbited, trying to assess, what had gone on. Because every light in the cockpit was going at that time, and every audible warning was screaming at that time. But all 3 of them came up close and they chased me. And all 3 of them said, "Dude, it's not worth it. You need to get out of that aircraft. Go hand it back to the taxpayers. It's not worth trying to land it at the time." And I will tell you, I think if that decision was left to me, again, rookie Lieutenant Merrell, I was going to try and land that aircraft. The checklist for the F-16 on landing gear malfunction has several iterations you can go through based on what kind of malfunction you have. And for that malfunction, where I had one good nose gear, one good main gear, and the other main gear was unknown, the checklist left it to pilot's discretion to determine that. And so I was going to be the hero, right? After being the idiot, I was going to be the hero and try and grab the approach end cable and land it that way. I am so thankful that I had the experienced pilots that I was flying with at the time, right? That had the wisdom to tell me, communicate to me, it's not worth it. Go to the controlled bailout location and get out of that aircraft. And I am grateful that they were able to relay that, to convince Lieutenant Merrell to do that, right? Because I went home that night, gave my wife a hug and said hello to my kids. And I don't know what the result would have been otherwise with that, right? So I learned the importance of a team and the importance and wisdom that comes with experience in there as well through that incident. So as talked about earlier, it took me 2 years before I then went from the F-16 to the MQ-9. I flew the remaining of those 2 years. It was awesome. I loved it. My squadron rallied around me after the ejection. But again, when it came time to choose a couple pilots to go fly the MQ-9, that wing commander put me at the top of the list, despite my squadron commander going to bat for me. So I go to fly the MQ-9. And again, it was the 9 most bitter pilots the Air Force had ever seen. We were probably a fairly toxic group going through there. But I will tell you, we got done with the training, and I will never forget the first combat sortie I had in the MQ-9. we were flying one MQ-9. It was in Iraq at the time. Um, we showed up. We showed up about mid-afternoon, and they said, "Hey, you four, you've got the aircraft for the night. We're all going home." And so it was two pilots and two sensor operators because the MQ-9 is a crew of two. And it was our responsibility to fly that aircraft throughout the night, which was the daytime in Iraq. And we were all four brand new to it. So sure, we got it. We don't know exactly what we're doing, but we got it. We'll fly this thing. Um, we So we took off, we came out, and our responsibility that night was to work with an Australian Special Operations Forces team. We check in with them, and they said, "Hey, we just got intel that we're about to be ambushed at our forward operating base. But rather than just wait here and take the ambush, we're going to go out and see if we can find the enemy first." And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. They went out, they made contact, and a giant gunfight, ensued there. And we were the one aircraft on top providing support for them. And I will never forget, it was about a 2-hour, battle that took place. We dropped 2 bombs, we shot 4 missiles, we were in constant communication with the team. We were their eyes in the sky, helping them out. But it was pretty intense there, almost like you see in the movies, where every time someone keys a mic on the radio, you hear people screaming in the background. Maybe someone screams incoming, and then the radio goes dead, right? While they're hunkering down, and you just hope that someone's going to come back up on the radio, at the end. So pretty intense, couple hours there. And I will never forget driving home that next morning thinking, man, I could have never done that in the F-16. I had deployed to Iraq in the F-16 and had dropped a couple bombs, in Haiti there, but I didn't have the loiter capability. I didn't have the communication capability. I didn't have the precision of the weapons, that I did in the MQ-9. I wasn't able to have that battle space awareness there. So the F-16 does a lot of incredible things, but for that mission that night, I don't think that team would have come home had I been flying overhead with an F-16. It required an MQ-9. So I had a lot of pondering to do, but I was immediately sold on, this is it. This is the future. I believe this is where I belong. And so 2 years later, when the Air Force said, "Hey, Phantom, the F-16 community is now undermanned. We need you guys to come back to the F-16," when originally they had told us, hey, it was a one-way door. Most of us, I would say probably about half of us, said, nope, this is the future right here. We want to stay with the MQ-9. So I learned a lot that I had to overcome my ego necessarily. That there's much more to this combat aviation than flying fast and being sexy. And I'll be completely honest with you, Louis. Do I miss flying upside down? Do I miss flying with my hair on fire, breaking the sound barrier, doing all those things? You bet I do. But I have had a sense of job satisfaction flying the MQ-9 that I don't think I could have experienced otherwise. And that was my first sortie. Since then, I could tell you dozens of experiences like that, right? Where I feel like I have significantly attributed, right, to someone's life or to national defense or, right, to an impact for good, flying the MQ-9. Whereas I don't know if I would have had all the same experiences otherwise. And I'll share one more maybe combat experience that's more recent that talks about what we're doing right now as well. So my group flies all around the globe. We fly for multiple different combatant commands. The MQ-9 has transitioned largely from a fight focused on counterinsurgency operations, which we still do today, right? And we still focused on those violent extremist organizations. But we also orient towards some of the near peers as well, right? Your China, your Russia, and North Korea, Iran. A couple weeks ago, I was flying here at Shaw Air Force Base, but my aircraft was about 100 miles east of Taiwan. And I don't fly very often as the commander of the 25th Attack Group as a colonel, sadly. My job is largely meetings and emails and traveling around. So I don't fly nearly as much as I would like to, but I try and fly once or twice a week, for a couple hours. And I was flying my aircraft that day. I was about 100 miles east of Taiwan, and I was executing an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission. And I was flying near a Chinese destroyer that was in international waters. I was flying in international airspace, but the captain of that destroyer didn't see it that way and was very angry with me and was yelling at me on guard several times. And I came back with my very professional, polite response. I'm a U.S. aircraft flying in international airspace, blah, 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 blah. And also in that couple hours that I was flying, I had a Chinese jet intercept me about 5 times. And we spent a lot of time looking at each other. Well, he was looking at the aircraft at least, but I was looking at him. And I'll never forget, I came out, a lieutenant came in, swapped me out. I got out of the seat. He jumped in. I walked to the building next door and I sat down in my next meeting, right? And even though I've been doing this for 15 years, it was sort of surreal, right? I went from flying 100 miles east of Taiwan in a couple minutes back to Shaw Air Force Base sitting in a meeting. And I think that just highlights, right, that technology and that capability of what we can do with remotely piloted aviation. And it highlights some of the strengths of it, that reach back capability, the communication, right? Because I'm sitting in a cockpit and I have multiple forms of communication, multiple phones, keyboards, monitors. I can talk to anybody, but I can also be anywhere at the same time. So it just had to make me think there again. Wow, this is pretty amazing what I can do. And I wish I wouldn't have to be in this meeting right now and that I could go back to flying the aircraft that I was just in. But yeah.
Yeah.
A few experiences for you, at least.
Wow. Yeah, there's some incredible stories there. And I just know that some of your experience just has, a million more just like that. But what I'm taking away from this really is just the vital importance of ISR platforms and the MQ-9. I mean, like you said, it just fills gaps that just were impossible before it, essentially. So, so much importance there. So kind of leading into that next question. And so as the division chief for the Joint Staff's J32 Force Management, you were responsible for developing global ISR allocation plans. So what were some of the most complex decision-making processes you faced, and how did you ensure that ISR resources were effectively deployed across the Department of Defense? So yeah, just a bit more kind of about, I guess, ISR and how that's being deployed and what you were doing there.
I spent 2 years in the basement of the Pentagon, and like you said, my job was to make recommendations, right, to the chairman and the secretary of defense through my chain of command, but make recommendations on how to allocate all those ISR assets around the globe. And the most difficult part of that job was the tension that existed between the force providers, right, of all your Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, and we even crossed over into the Space Force, but the force providers and that tension that existed between the combatant commanders that needed those things and used those assets and those things. Because they have 2 different missions. The combatant commands have a requirement to fight the mission, right? And they have to be ready for that mission, whatever it is today. The force providers have to look to the future, and they have to budget accordingly to have a force, right, that can fight a future war as well as today's war. So there's a tension and a gap that exists there. And the difficult part of the seat that I sat in was trying to provide those assets to the combatant commands, but at the same time recognizing we were limited in capacity in what we could provide, right? Because if we provided it all, then there wasn't a way to get to that future force, right? You can't put the whole force, you can't commit it all and be able to do things like train and retain and upgrade. So there's this constant tension that existed. And it would get it would get frictious at times, I would say, as we try to make those decisions. I will tell you, we had an incredible team that would do that, right? We had the experts there in the building, some civilian, some contract that have been there for a while that knew the game. And we had a lot of uniform folks that would come through. We had a lot of uniform folks that would come from the different platforms, right? The Navy guys that were familiar with the P-8s, Air Force that were familiar with the RC-135. We had MQ-9 guys, and gals. We had them all there who could talk to, right, those. And then we would get the requirement that came in from the combatant commands, and everything that we communicated was done in risk. So we looked at risk. If we don't give this asset to the combatant command that they have requested, what is the risk that will happen there? If we have to pull this asset from the force provider, let's say from the Air Force, what is the risk that the Air Force incurs in that? And so risk was our communication language. If the chairman had a question, hey, well, what will happen if this, right? The answer was always, here's the risk that is assumed, right, in making that decision. I learned a lot in that job about risk and just being able to communicate. I had an incredible boss there who mentored me in that strategic communication. I will tell you, probably the most stressful moments in that job were in what's called a tank. And a tank is where it's a small room. It's on the E wing of the Pentagon. And a tank occurs periodically, but 1 to 2 times a month. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will gather all the chiefs of each, so the chief of staff of the Air Force, the CNO of the Navy, right, will all come together. And it's a small room where just those folks fit into the room. And then they'll usually have 1 or 2 briefers come in, and they'll allot 1 to 2 hours to talk about one important discussion, right? And there were 3 times that I had to brief in the tank. A lot of stress, going in there. You can imagine all the 4 stars gathered around, the combatant commands dial in, and you're the subject matter expert in that room for that hour or two. And there were 3 times I had to present in there. But I was grateful for that team, right? That helped prepare me for that. They're the ones that got all that information, that put it together and helped me prepare for those. So I learned the importance again of that teamwork, relying on the team, and being able to talk to risk. I think were the big things I learned there.
Definitely. So, I mean, how do you see all of this? I mean, you look at it, how much it's all evolved, and you look at even, I was having this conversation the other day, looking at even just how the F-16s evolved over the last, one career worth of, where it was a few years ago versus where it is now and how it's all been modernized. And then you look at UAVs and ISR, incredible evolutions there. But I'm wondering just kind of like, where do you sort of see the future of UAVs going in future conflicts and stuff too? Just any kind of innovations or things that might be on the radar for the future with some of the unmanned technology that you can maybe share in that space as well?
I believe, right, we can learn a lot from history. The F-16 was designed as a day VFR visual dogfighter, basically, right? That was the design of it. To stop the Soviet hordes, right, in Eastern Germany, and to put these aircraft up at mass, right, to use sidewinders and guns, basically. And you look at what it's doing today, and it has evolved significantly from that mission, right? I think we have seen a similar evolution with the MQ-9, right, as it was designed, again, to fight a counterinsurgency, to fight violent extremist organizations in an uncontested airspace. And it's evolved today, again, to where we're flying right in the East China Sea, doing intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. We have proven it as we can do combat search and rescue, right? We've proven it in several different missions that it wasn't designed for. I think as we look at future remotely piloted aircraft or, autonomous aircraft, I think we need to be open to the fact that if we need to create open architecture, we need to create systems that can evolve over time, that aren't niche, right, weapon systems that then are obsolete, right, if that mission changes. I think the Air Force is driving down the right path with collaborative combat aircraft, right? And they're running pretty fast towards that. I think as you look at, maybe future remotely piloted aircraft, I think you look at that in mind. Let's create systems that are capable of multiple things and are able to adapt over time. And I think the Air Force is doing that wisely and correctly. Also doing it at speed as well, which I think has been a challenge in the past. As you look at, maybe something like the F-35 or F-22, these systems take a lot of time from first thought to actual fully operational capable. But I think the Air Force has learned that lesson and is speeding up that acquisition process as well. Those are my thoughts there, Louis.
Fantastic. Yeah. So then let's get into the things that you're doing now then. So you're command of the 25th Attack Group. I'd love to learn a bit more about kind of like what day-to-day is like there essentially too. So you're leading a group responsible for providing 24/7 global MQ-9 operations. Just a bit about what that takes then. So what are the key challenges of maintaining such high stakes operations, and how do you ensure your team remains prepared and mission ready at all times? So just tell me all about everything you're doing now and how that's kind of playing a part in the future of what we were just talking about too.
The RPA community has grown significantly since the time I joined it in 2008. It is now the largest weapon system, people-wise, in the United States Air Force. We have more than 2,200 pilots and combat system officers in the Air Force. And then we've got more than 1,700 sensor operators in that. Now, my group is about a third of that. Again, we are the conventional MQ-9 force offering to the combatant commands. I have the 4 attack squadrons. And at any one time, 3 of those 4 attack squadrons are flying combat sorties. And they're doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, all around the world. And that is a challenge. That's a significant challenge, right? To man that, to do that. We're more healthy today than we were in the past, right? As Captain Merrell grew up flying the MQ-9, we were committed all the time for years, right? So you'd show up, and if you had a 3 or 4 year assignment in a squadron, you were going to be flying shift work 24/7, 365 for those 3 or 4 years. We are now healthy enough to where, like I said, only 3 of my 4 combat squadrons are committed at any one time. And the squadron that isn't committed now, we're able to focus on training, and we can focus on exercises. We can pick that squadron up, and we can go to a red flag and integrate with everyone there and integrate with the joint force, right? We've gone out recently and we've executed exercises with the South Koreans. And we've just last week, my squadron that is in Missouri took 2 aircraft off from Creech Air Force Base in Las Vegas, and we flew out to Missouri. And we integrated with the A-10s there in Missouri, doing a combat search and rescue exercise with them. So having that capacity now where you can bring one of those squadrons back, focus on training, is huge, because we haven't been able to do that in the past. And what that allows us to do is, again, whereas in decades past, we were focused on that, insurgency fight, we can now take the capabilities of the MQ-9, the long loiter, the precision, the reach back capability, the communications, take all those capabilities now and focus on other fights, dynamic targeting, combat search and rescue, war at sea, right? Maritime war. And we can train for those things in case we're ever asked to execute those, as well. But the challenge with the 24/7, 365, I will tell you, it's a burden on my squadron commanders, on my senior enlisted leaders in those squadrons, on the directors of operation, just to man those squadrons and keep them right, manned and trained and proficient, through those combat sorties. It's difficult, but I will tell you the folks that are flying it right now are up to the task and they are killing it. They're doing a great job. And I couldn't be more proud of what they are doing every day. It is incredible. In addition to our active duty units, also we have a close association with the Air National Guard. We've got 12 different states flying the MQ-9 as well, and we have a close relationship with them as they do many of the same similar missions that we're executing around the globe as well. More than 40 total force squadrons, right, fly remotely piloted aircraft. So it is a huge industry. I would say sometimes forgot about, within the Air Force. Some of the leadership challenges that come with that are just that span of control, right? Where I have MQ-9s that fly around the globe, it's difficult for me at times, at the level I'm at, to maintain those relationships with when we're flying in Europe, right? There's a European command that's there. When we're flying in the Middle East, the same. And when we're flying in the Indo-Pacific, at my level, right, I have to maintain those relationships and make sure that, we're executing what is being asked of us in each one of those combatant commands as well. And that is a challenge. I've got a great boss, though, that gives me a lot of autonomy to be able to do that, to go out and, and make those relationships and execute that, and also provides the necessary top cover when I need it, when I ask for it. I also have an incredible group of squadron commanders that I have given scissors to and said, go run. And they take that and they go run with those scissors and they do an awesome job with it. And they come to me when they need help, but they largely run autonomously. And each one of them is punching well above their weight. Whereas in a lot of other organizations, right, there would be a colonel or an 06 maybe doing a lot of their things. They're out there as an 05, as lieutenant colonels, doing colonel things, and then just asking me for help when they need it. So all those lessons learned that I talked about earlier, right? You have to give people autonomy. You have to make sure they understand the purpose and the why we're doing what we're doing. And then I think we have to provide them a level of mastery. We have to give them the resources, right, to be proficient at what they're doing. But we also have to give them opportunities where they can continue to progress and to move towards something else. And my squadron commanders do an excellent job with all of that. Again, I couldn't be more proud of what they're doing. It's a great team.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely. And, that's great advice from, the leadership perspective, but actually talking to these people as well, especially youngsters and youth coming into the industry, enlisting, wanting to come into this side of things too. I think it'd be remiss not to just speak a little bit about the kind of mentorship aspect for youngsters as well, towards the end of this podcast today. So any kind of like really good tips there on just developing leadership early, setting up good morals, and also just what kind of skill set would be really important for going into ISR based things in the military?
I think the most common thing that I talk to the younger folks, right, that are brand new in the Air Force, their primary responsibility is to become a expert in the weapon system. That is what they contribute, right? So it's to spend time in the books, to spend time in training, to put in that effort so that when they are called upon, they can provide, right? And they can come through. Whether that be in the systems that are on the aircraft, so that they can understand that if an emergency happens, they know how to handle it, or the systems on the aircraft that are executing the mission, right? That are either collecting, either visually or via, signals intelligence, right? But they have to be the expert on those systems in order to execute the mission. They have to be the expert on the rules of engagement and the special instructions for wherever we are flying, right? Because we have 19, 20-year-old airmen that could either prevent World War III or cause World War III, right? Based on what they do. you can think, right, if we're flying in very sensitive areas and they fly into the wrong airspace or area, I mean, there, there's not a lot of hyperbole here, right? They could kick something off, or they could prevent it by flying in that area and based on what they collect. Um, we are of a deterrence mindset, right? We are being airborne every day and executing our mission. We are deterring, right, the nation's enemies. But we also have to be prepared in case that deterrence fails at any time. So oftentimes our missions can get boring based on where we're flying, what we're doing, the length of time we're flying. But in seconds, they can also get extremely stressful as well. And so they, again, have to be prepared, right, for all those incidents. So that's my first piece of advice to them is become the expert in your weapon system and always continue, right? Once you feel like you've mastered it, there's more to do. There's something else to learn. Um, and because the platform is so diverse in the mission sets that it can execute, at no one could honestly say, I am good at all the missions that we can do, right? There's always something that we can do better at. Similar to the F-16, that's multi-role. There's a lot of different roles the MQ-9 can perform, whether they be in our daily operations or preparing for future operations. So we've always got to be on the edge and learning more there. I also tell them that there is nothing personal, right, in getting better as well. Our community was sort of founded by a lot of fighter pilots. And with that, I think we brought some of that culture with us as well, that debrief culture of, I'm going to go out and I'm going to fly a sortie. I'm going to do the best that I can. And when we come back, we're going to step into a debrief room. We close the door. The rank comes off and we're going to talk about what went wrong. And we're going to talk about how to fix it, right? Because there is no perfect sortie. And so when the airmen show up, we try and communicate to them that, hey, this is not ego. This is not personal. If Colonel Merrell, right, is flying, I expect to go back into a debrief room and the lieutenant or the captain that's the instructor for that day, right, should be able to tell me exactly what I did wrong and how to fix it. And my rank is gone at that point. So we've instilled a culture, right, that is constantly trying to improve, and we leave our egos at the door because otherwise we can't continue to improve there. I think the motivation piece with the younger folks, I think was part of your question. It comes in that why and the purpose, right? And that's on me as a leader to explain and communicate that why of what we are doing every day. And again, some of the missions that we execute can get fairly monotonous over time. And so I think it's important to over communicate that why. Here's why we are flying this sortie today. And here's the importance of it. Here's what it contributes to national defense, or here's what it contributes, right, to deterring this enemy that we're flying with today. And there may be times where folks don't agree with the why on a more granular level, but I have found that if you are communicating it, right, even if they don't agree with it, they'll get on board and they'll jump like, yep, I get it. You're explaining the why to me. Maybe I don't agree with that why, but I'm going to execute today because at least you've given me that why. Yeah.
That's great. Really, really solid advice there. I completely agree. And you need to understand the why to have the passion and the motivation to go and do that job well and understand it too. And I think that comes on to the really important point there about how to lead a team outside of the military and stuff too, in business and everything too. You need your team and the people who follow you as well to understand your vision for things as well, and also the main vision of the whole project as well. And then they can find a way to get behind it too. Makes me wonder then, any kind of like big correlations there you see between the work that you do in the military and what could also apply to people outside of that too, in the business and sports world and entrepreneurship as well, things like that. So any of those key principles of team building like that one there, but any other ones that maybe I missed there too that could be applied?
I think that's a great question. So having never been, I think, on the professional side, right outside of the military, but having friends and family and whatnot that are, I I would still probably lean back on that leadership philosophy of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? And I can't say that I came up with that. There was an author, Daniel Pink. I read a book by him. Oh, it's been a while now, over 10 years ago, titled Drive. And in that book, he talked about the different generations and what motivates different generations, right? Because we are different from your, the greatest generation to the boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, right? I think we grew up in different eras, and so we're motivated by different things naturally. And I'm not saying that's a negative thing, right? Some folks, oh, the young ones, right? Not at all. Um, but it's important, I think, to understand what those different motivators are and how those generations are different. Um, so I think my recommendation there would be to understand what those are, but ultimately I think you can bin each one of those generations, right, into those three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. What level of autonomy, right, does this generation prefer? And it changes, right? Because your boomers maybe don't seek or want as much autonomy as the young folks now do, right? They thrive on that autonomy. But at the same time, it's understanding how much autonomy is appropriate, right? For the missions that we fly, there are some missions where I want to provide as much autonomy as possible, but there's other missions maybe where risk is really high. And again, as the commander of the 25th Attack Group, I want to avoid World War III. And so maybe we have to shrink that autonomy down. But I still want to be able to provide as much as possible. And it's understanding what that is. The mastery piece as well. I think we've got to give folks the opportunity. They seek mastery, right? Folks are motivated by that. And if we cut them off somewhere in there and that progression stops, why would I want to be with a company where I can't continue to progress, right? I'm going to move on to something else. So I'll take my crayons and go somewhere else, right? And then the purpose, right? I think regardless if it's military, if it's industry, we owe them the purpose in what they're doing. And I think we owe them the large purpose, right? Here's the big goal, but I think we owe them the small purpose as well of how what they are doing, right, contributes, to the bigger picture as well. But I think some of those same leadership philosophies I could see, playing a part inside of the military, outside of the military as well. I think as a father of four kids, I will tell you my leadership philosophy doesn't change from work to home as well. I think folks have to know that you care about them as well, right? My kids know that I love them, and because they know that, sometimes I can ask them to do hard things, right? If my squadron commanders know that I care and love for them, right, then they're going to go do some hard things when I have to ask for it. So I think that applies to both sides as well.
Yeah, really, really solid advice there. With that being said, I think now's probably a great time to go into the shameless plug then. So we've got through those 4 questions. This is a great one to just kind of go into where you think people should kind of go next out of this podcast too then. So obviously a lot of good talk there around leadership, instilling good quality. So I noticed you've got a massive bookshelf behind you, and I love book recommendations. So any great books that you recommend people go and take a look at, recruitment, social media, websites, just anything that you really believe in and you think people should take a look at, who get, to this stage of the podcast and then going on from here, basically.
That's a great question, Louis. I think, I am a lover of books. I always haven't been. But I will tell you, I attended a school as a Major Merrell went to a school called the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. And it's a year-long school, and they call it the Book of Day Club, where they literally give you a book every day, 4 days a week, and you read it that night, and you come back the next day and you discuss it with a group of your peers. And I fell in love with reading at that point and saw the true benefits of that lifelong learning mentality and whatnot. So, I don't know if I have a specific recommendation. I've got a lot of books I love. I would say it depends on, what a person is interested in. I like a breadth of reading. So if I find myself getting focused, in one area, then not good things, right? I think it's good to stay broad there. So whether it be biographies, history, I read a couple recently. Back to the generation talk there. I read a great book called Generations. Um, I've read the most recent one I read was called The Anxious Generation, where it talks about the current generation growing up and some of the challenges we have given them, mainly by providing them a cell phone at a very young age. And then, and these aren't the author's words, this is my rough, thesis statement, but coddling, the young generation as well. And those two things, have created challenges that they shouldn't have to deal with. But those are two that impacted me recently. If anybody's interested in leadership or being a parent, I would highly recommend those two books. For the plug piece, Louis, I would just say I am a huge advocate of the remotely piloted aircraft, industry, whatever you want to label it, right? But again, I came over to this community kicking and screaming and thinking that my goals and my life was over and woe is me, and was quickly sold on the capabilities that exist here. And I think there is a bright future. I do not think manned aviation should come to an end. I don't think, right, that I see men and women sitting in cockpits fighting wars for a long time into the future. However, I see the remotely piloted of that portion of that, or the autonomous portion of that, being a critical component of successful fights in the future as well. And I'm glad that the Air Force is leaning into that we are embracing that. And I would continue to advocate for not only that remotely piloted aviation, but the autonomous piece of that as well. When I first joined the MQ-9 community, again, we were largely populated by fighter pilots. And even on the remote side, excuse me, there was a resistance to some of the autonomy, right? We started executing timed attacks in there. And where the system, we could have gone to the engineers and said, hey, program the systems so that it will execute this, attack almost autonomously. And for a lot of folks, they're like, oh no, the world will come to an end. We have to fly that manually. But I will tell you, there's been a shift in that, and I'm grateful for it as we lean more into automation and the goodness that can come, with that, while keeping a man or woman on the loop and or in the loop, through all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just realized it's quite funny as well. It must be very bittersweet to be based at shore where all of those F-16s are constantly taking off, right?
It is. And my office, I will tell you, we just moved into a brand new building, and my office has a giant window that looks out over the approach end of the runway. And so every day, right, I see formation after formation, doing their overhead pattern over the field. And part of me is like, man, I would love to go do that. But again, I don't regret for any second, right, the last 15 years and what I've been able to experience at all.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, Phantom, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. This has been a really great chat. I've learned an immense amount. I know everyone listening in has too. And I just want to say a massive thank you for your service, both in the F-16 and the MQ-9 and everything you're doing now and that you're going to do. We all appreciate you and appreciate you taking the time to do this today. It's been a really, really great chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. I appreciate it as well. It's been fun. And I look forward to continuing to listen to some of the folks that you interview in the future. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you too. It's going to be great. And I appreciate you guys listening in as well. This was episode 153. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. If you'd like to listen in for the future ones coming up too, make sure to hit the subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you in the next one. Cheers.